I kind of wonder, like a lot of times, like what's going on because on the one hand, I like to joke about the people who just like throw a fit because some politician wants to come talk at the Bitcoin conference and they're like, this is not what Bitcoin was designed to be, and kind of the thing I laugh about is I always think like, aren't you the same person who's like talking about like hyper Bitcoinization like all over the world? Like, I don't know if you know this, but there are lots and lots of people who use dollars that you don't personally like. And so if Bitcoin is going to be a dominant currency, right? If it's going to be something that people are using in their everyday lives, people you don't like are going to be using it and talking about it and have their own opinions on it. But I do kind of wonder like where the sentiment comes from. And I think it probably is just that we got here way faster than anybody thought possible. So there were always people saying, oh, well, eventually the United States government will be telling you to buy Bitcoin, right? And people would laugh at them, but they would say like, wow, I mean, I don't mean next year. I mean, some point in the future. And I don't know how far in the future they thought they were thinking about, but maybe it was 25 years, 50 years, 100 years. I don't know. But it certainly wasn't like 2 or 3 years. And so I think that the speed with which this became, salient with politicians and things like that, I think came way faster than people realized. And I think that might actually be the concern that people are voicing when they make these complaints is they sort of thought it would take longer. And also it's much easier to think about like these hypothetical politicians in the future that are going to tell you something positive about Bitcoin than it is like, the guy you just saw on television last week, who you may or may not like. That, I think that changes the perspective because in your head, you're thinking, hey, like, 25 years ago, some politician I really like is going to come on television and talk really nicely about this. And then when it turns out to not play out that way, I think maybe that's a little hard for people. But I mean, like, look, there is this inherent tension here, right, in the sense that um, sort of like that sort of cypherpunk, um, that cypherpunk core, right? That this all grew out of. I totally understand like the idea that you want to kind of hang on to that and that's kind of important. But I also think that's a completely unrealistic idea. Like it was never the only way it was going to be that way is if it wasn't particularly successful, right? If it was just kind of this niche thing that only a few people cared about, like, yeah, you could really maintain that. And I'm not saying that you as an individual should say, well, that sort of lost and we can't be like that. No, no, no. Like you should represent your opinion in the same way that everybody else is representing their opinion. And, you should try to move things in that direction. But I mean, honestly, what we need to bring back is more of the, we need to bring back all of the memes from the old days, which is just, Bitcoin doesn't care. Right. Like when, and use them back on the same people who were throwing them at other people back then. Right. Is, we need to bring that back. Bitcoin doesn't care. It doesn't exist for you, specifically. Right. And I think that in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the person who had like a favorite band before everybody knew about the band. And I think that's kind of the same sentiment is it's hard to accept that now this thing that you thought was kind of your thing is now, lots of people's thing. And maybe they don't appreciate it as much as you do, or maybe they weren't there in the early days, but that's how it works.
I think also because I agree with you that I very much understand the sentiment of like, okay, would it be ideal to not have a bunch of slimy politicians, riding on the coattails of Bitcoin? Sure, but you can't, like, that's the whole point of Bitcoin is you can't stop anyone from using it or trying to associate with it. Affinity scams with Bitcoin have been going on forever, for a long time, will go on for a long time in various, methods. But I think also that perhaps the political attention on Bitcoin in some ways can provide some additional cover for the cypherpunk core, which is still so vital. Like you still need the anonymous open source freedom tech developers building the incredible stuff that is going to enable all of us to actually live and thrive in a more sovereign way. in a hyper Bitcoinized future. At the same time, I think perhaps, it's almost more helpful than people realize to have some of the political attention on it, because that creates a different kind of attention. It's a different kind of conversation. And if you can, very much, yes, the system will not change itself from within, but it can be nudged in the right direction, right? And I think having what I've said often to Zach from BPI is that I'd rather have a Senate full of Lummises than Warrens, right? And I think any reasonable person would, right? You'd rather have the current administration, the current U.S. government administration stance on Bitcoin than you would like to have China's stance, let's say. I personally would prefer that. I'm not going to prefer a more oppressive government, a more Bitcoin unfriendly government, simply because it gives me something to fight against. You can continue, just because the state is speaking in favorable terms about Bitcoin doesn't mean Bitcoin has been subsumed by the state. It's to talk about other old memes, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. I think that is also true of government. That doesn't mean we shouldn't remain vigilant. We absolutely should. But there are potential benefits to Bitcoin getting positive attention from the government. Not, again, the Lummis kind of attention, not the Warren kind of attention. And I think this is what I really like initially when I heard about BPI. And I should mention you are a senior fellow, right? Is that
Yep.
the correct? Yeah. And also you're a professor and chair of the Department of Economics at University of Mississippi, and probably have a nice long resume to go along with that. We can get into that a bit as well, just to talk about the academia side of things, because you are a rebel econ prof after all. But when I initially heard about BPI, it was kind of like, that maybe my gut reaction was, well, I don't know if we should be trying to, why are we even bothering with these politicians, right? Why are we even doing that? And then I thought about it for more than 2 seconds, and I thought, oh, well, actually, that's quite good. Now you have people in congressional hearings that are speaking about Bitcoin positively. You've got generals speaking about how, hey, we're running a node. That was a crazy hearing there. Instead of just having Elizabeth Warren asking softball questions to Jamie Dimon about how Bitcoin's only used by criminals. It's which one would you rather have? I'd rather have the 4-star generals talking about how Bitcoin is important for national security than have Elizabeth Warren, basically having a massage with Jamie Dimon there. That's just me. Maybe I'm off base. I don't know.
Well, there's a big picture thing and a small picture thing, I think. So the first thing is I think that for most of us, well, I don't know, maybe it depends on the age of the audience here. But I would say for most of my life, politics was kind of fake, right? For most of my life, politics, the parties weren't all that different, right? They had particular emphases, I guess, that were relatively different, but sort of politics was sort of fake. But everything else was kind of real, right? And I think that we've kind of transitioned in this period where everything is fake, but politics have become real. And I think that politics, the stakes in our politics are actually real again. If you listen to how our politicians talk, they very much talk in a sort of existential, threat of their opponent, right? That's very, very different. I mean, rhetoric wise, maybe not, but I mean, in terms of now, it seems much more like they believe it, right? Whereas maybe you would say this about your political opponent because it helps you in a campaign commercial. I mean, now, they seem to mean it. And then as related to that is that, you don't have to care about politics, but politics is going to care about you. And when politics becomes real, you have no choice but to engage. Because if you're the person who's not going to engage, then that means you're just going to be the loser of this process, right? The person who just wants to sit in the comfortable middle ground is just going to get run over. And so when politics get real, you actually have to take a side and you have to actually take a stand on things. And especially when people are talking about it in terms of this existential language. And so when the politicians show up and they want to talk about Bitcoin, wouldn't it be much better to have people who can talk um, from a position of being well educated in the technology or in the economics or in, or in terms of like how the mining works and all of these kinds of things. Like you want people who are, you want people in that room who can bring, common sense and truth to the conversation and who are going to advocate on your behalf. And you might not care about it, but once they're interested in it, you need to care about it because how this plays out is going to depend on who's in that room.